When it comes to the Final Fantasy IX Remake, one of the biggest question marks that the community has right now is most definitely the art style. The art style is definitely going to be like one of those things that is going to do or break this game. Final Fantasy IX has this very distinct sort of look. It doesn't really look like Final Fantasy 7, 8, or 10 onward. Hironobu Sakaguchi did mention before that he wanted to go back to the roots when building the design overall of this game, and going back to that sort of more chibi and stylistic style of the early Final Fantasy games and implement his original vision to the game. And you can definitely tell, especially from the character designs, these are much more stylized, especially when compared to Final Fantasy 7 or 8. Even when comparing this game to stylized games, this game is very unique in its art style, mostly because it was using pre-rendered backgrounds. A lot of it is because of its unique art style, especially on the character side. Everything was basically hand-painted, especially even the shadows. And so there's a lot of work here. There's a lot of stylization that feels very unique, even for today's standards. A lot of people most likely have heard about this project, which is the Memorial project. And I have to say, this project is amazing. This is a really cool project made by a bunch of amazing developers that have put in a lot of time and effort into this. But my worry is that if they tend to go to this sort of style for the Final Fantasy Remake, this feels heavily stylized, like too stylized, at least from what I believe the Final Fantasy IX Remake should be. Because I don't know, man, there's something about this that feels like a balance between stylization and realism. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is. Honestly, I think it's a combination of how the lighting is done and also the line work in general. Like you see here that, you know, there's a good amount of light, right? But there's also a good amount of shadow everywhere. I think there's just a better balance between light and shadow, generally speaking. Obviously, there's also the thing of these are pre-rendered backgrounds, which means that the developers had a fixed camera, and so this allowed them to play around with these backgrounds a lot more. And the funny thing about these pre-rendered backgrounds is that they actually create this sort of effect of a cinematic sort of look to Final Fantasy IX. The new Final Fantasy games have a very big difference, especially from 12 onward, which is you have a 360 camera where you can see everything around you. And so they had to take that into account. They are no longer in control of the camera, which is a huge thing. In this game though, for the most part, you are not in control of the camera. The developers are the ones controlling the camera, so they can control a lot better what you can see and what you cannot see, which ends up allowing them to create a lot more detail and storytelling into every single scene that you watch. I did find this guy, Christian Lawrence Schuer, I do not know how to say his name, but he is a designer. He worked for a ton of stuff already. He has a long career, but early on he actually worked on Final Fantasy IX for the background specifically, and he did a good chunk of the concept art for the game, but he also did some matte paintings like you can see here. These pre-render backgrounds are basically done this way. You have the CG model, right, where you go to a 3D renderer and you basically do a 3D pass of just the overall shapes and the basic lighting and everything. And then you go, for example, to a program like Photoshop or Krita, and then you create a lot more detail. And I'm assuming that especially in this day and age of the 2000s and, you know, the 90s, doing work that is much more organic like this, right? It's probably just way easier to do it in Photoshop, in a program like Photoshop, than, you know, doing it in a renderer. There's also this very curious case where I'm pretty sure that they mostly did the CG model almost entirely on the 3D software, and then they actually wanted to showcase a destroyed version of the city because something happens later on in the game, and they actually just grabbed this image and just did the matte painting on top of the destroyed version, and it works really well. This is actually something that I believe Jake and Cecile mentioned in this interview that MinMax did, I believe a couple of months ago, 2 years ago, and it's a great watch if you want to see this. These two dudes were part from the Hawaii team of Final Fantasy IX, and they worked extensively on the backgrounds. But the one thing that I want to show you guys is this. There's this guy called Fabian Denter that did this beautiful work of recreating one of the scenes of Final Fantasy IX. And I have to say, if there is a style that I personally would love to see on this Final Fantasy IX remake, it's something like this. You still have that fixed camera, you still have that feeling of the pre-rendered backgrounds, but this is basically entirely 3D still. And he actually has on Polycount the breakdown for this entire scene. I will leave the links of everything that I'm watching down below, don't worry. It's really cool to see the entirety of the progress that he did here. He did a fantastic job, and I think this actually encapsulates a lot better what I would expect at the very least from a Final Fantasy IX Remake, which is to keep that balance between pre-rendered backgrounds that still very much feels like it's there, but now everything is actually 3D. Because a lot of people back then did pre-render backgrounds just because it was just a lot cheaper when it comes to performance. Creating these characters and having a ton of NPCs running around, this was already extremely heavily, especially for the PlayStation 1. And so they probably needed ways to create highly detailed environments, but at the same time keep the performance very low. So what you end up doing, if you did it now, is just go to Blender, create a scene, do a render, and then just put this image as a PNG, basically, right? Or a JPEG or whatever. Another point that is going to be very curious to see is how they're going to deal with the character designs. This image, you've probably seen it from the 25th anniversary. It is a gorgeous image. I adore this image. I think it encapsulates incredibly well the vibe of Final Fantasy IX. And honestly, if the game is called Final Fantasy IX Timeless Tale, beautiful name. I would not like to see Final Fantasy IX Remake. I think it's kind of lame. Final Fantasy IX Timeless Tale is a gorgeous name for a remake of this game, I'm not gonna lie. But we have these figurines that have been posted by Square Enix, and they're all on sale right now on their website, and it might just be showcasing to us their overall design for these characters in this game. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what to think about them. I have my worries. I think it looks cool, but I have my worries, especially with Zidane here. I think I'm just gonna wait and see what they actually have to show in the game, because I think the lighting, especially the lighting, is not helping here, because, you know, they do like portrait lighting, which means that the entirety of the figurine is lighted evenly, which makes sense to sell a product. That's what you kind of do normally when you sell a product. You want to do a lighting that is fairly evenly lit everywhere so you can see everything well. But one thing is seeing this here, and another thing is seeing in the actual game. It's going to be very, very different. And heck, this might not even be the final version of the character design. I have my worries just because it doesn't feel like it has, I don't know, there's something missing, and I can't really pinpoint exactly what it is. Maybe it's how the chin looks. It feels like it's much more rounded. The spikes on the hair also don't feel as pointy, you know, as dangerous as the previous Zidane. I don't know, there's something about it that just feels a bit odd to me. Yeah, at least looking at this image specifically, it does feel like the two things that I'm pointing out, which is like the chin, right? If you check here, and even the hair, it feels like everything is a lot more pointier, right? I think I understand why they're doing this. If you have things that are more round, generally speaking, like psychology and how it works on humans, it means that everything is a lot more cute and a lot more safe. You know, think about babies. Babies are round, and you think of them as like cute little balls, right? But if everything is a little bit more pointy, that means a little bit more dangerous, right? Think about, for example, when you go on a jungle or a forest, for example, you need to be careful with like plants that are very pointy, right? I don't know. I feel like I kind of wanted them to keep as close as to like the Zidane look. And it definitely feels like there's some changes being made for sure. I mean, it was always going to happen, but you know. Yeah, there's definitely something here that just feels odd to me. Maybe it's actually just the lighting. Maybe it's just how the render now is actually done, which is very different, to be fair. I think they're definitely pushing for the stylization of the game, and I am a bit worried that they're going to push too much that stylization. I feel like they need a balance, and sure, go for that stylized, but bring a little bit of that realism and a lot of those shadows, especially that. Bring these shadows, right? Look at these shadows. These are dark, man. Like, these are very, very dark right here, okay? Obviously, like, there's a lot of other things that people are worried about and hope that they can get in this new version of the game, like, you know, a better trans system, because the trans system is just doesn't really work in the game. Like, you have no control of when the trans system kicks in from the player. I actually think something along the lines of Final Fantasy X Overdrive could work really well, but honestly, they can just grab this as an excuse to pursue something new with the battle system. Because that's one thing that Final Fantasy IX is really curious. It's a combat combat system that doesn't really do anything special. Even for the time, when compared to previous entries of the game, it didn't really do anything new or special. It worked really well, but it just didn't innovate in any sort of way, which was odd at the time. And they can absolutely now grab this chance really to implement new ideas in a turn-based combat system. Another thing that I really want them to change is the Tetramaster minigame. It's just a broken mess. Like, it's bad. Like, check this guy here, right? Like, he did a video, almost 80k views 9 years ago, explaining like Tetramaster and how it works and the overall rules, yada yada. Look at what people say in the comments. I'm even more confused now. I can't put into words how angry this video makes me. Good lord, I had to rewatch the first 2 minutes multiple times and finally felt proud that I think I understood it. Like, this minigame is actually an interesting minigame, but it's just a mess. It's a complete mess. It's so hard to understand the basics of it. It's insane. Just rework it, alright? Obviously, there's probably other things they can definitely pursue and improve from Final Fantasy IX, especially when it comes to like the overall story. You know, maybe develop the characters of Freya and Amarant a little bit more, because I feel like those two characters in the game, they don't get quite the love that other characters do. You know, maybe explore a little bit more different regions of the game that probably felt a little bit underused. Maybe do an epilogue. I feel like this game, especially the finale, I'm obviously not going to spoil it in this video, but I feel like the finale actually kind of deserves an epilogue. Maybe we actually see what happens to the characters after the main event of Final Fantasy IX, and who knows, it might actually serve as a pinpoint for a potential sequel to Final Fantasy IX if Square Enix really wants to do that. If there's one game that actually I feel like deserves, or it feels okay to do a sequel to, I would say it's Final Fantasy IX. Mostly because of how it ends. Now look, I'm not a fan of sequels generally speaking, but you know, if there is a Final Fantasy that makes sense to do a sequel, it's definitely this one, not Final Fantasy X. My god, I cannot even start with Final Fantasy X-3! But yeah, I'm going to be really curious to see what they do with the art style. It's definitely going to be a do or break for a lot of people. It's going to be impossible to appeal to everyone, and so they have a big mission in their hands.